Hi, I'm Abby and this is Abby Matt Reads, and I know my hair looks stupid, but I don't care because I am hot. It is hot in Wales today. If you are watching this, it might mean that you have stuck by me through my mental health hiatus, and if that is the case, then thank you so much. I've been so worried. But now I've got a special video for you today, so let's get on with it. I'm dedicating an entire video to Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca. I want to do this regularly with books I feel are important. And I think Rebecca is an important book, a modern classic crafted by one of the, if not the most underrated writer of the 20th century, and one of the most prolific to boot. A bit about du Maurier herself. She was born in 1907 into this creative dynasty of a family that she has actually written a lot about herself. Her grandfather was the talented artist and writer George du Maurier, and both of her parents were quite into acting. She had a privileged upbringing and was encouraged to be opinionated, take part in intelligent debates, and discover and develop a love of new words. She fell in love with Cornwall when her family bought a holiday home there in 1920, and her love of Cornwall bleeds into most of her writing, creating the beautiful backdrop for most of her novels, including Rebecca. She was quite reclusive though, but I've come to find that some of the best writers actually are. But to give you an example of her dedication to literature, her first book, The Loving Spirit, was published in 1931, and her last, Rule Britannia, was published in 1972, a staggering 41 years later. I sadly think that the days where a writer's life could last that long are over. She was at the peak of her career in the 50s when My Cousin Rachel came out, and she was named the highest paid female writer in the UK. Also, at least 8 of her short stories have been adapted to the screen in the US or the UK. Among the most famous are The Birds and Don't Look Now. Daphne du Maurier started writing Rebecca in the late summer of 1937, and it became her masterpiece, and I can't wait to start talking about it. The main character and narrator of Rebecca has no name. Daphne once said that she just couldn't think of one, and it became an exercise in technique to write her without one. But I also think it adds to the insignificance of this character, as her circumstances definitely prove that to be the point. It must be every insecure girl's worst nightmare, this story imparts, as our unnamed narrator meets rich older man Maxim in Monte Carlo. Maxim whisks her off her feet, which is an easy task to do, as all her family is dead, and the only person that she has in the world is the reason she is in Monte Carlo in the first place, a vile old woman called Mrs. Van Hopper, who is paying this narrator to be her companion there in Monte Carlo. They marry, and Maxim takes her back to his precious and most infamous house of Mandalay in Cornwall, where our narrator has to live under the shadow of Maxim's first wife, Rebecca. Rebecca drowned off the coast of Mandalay, and no one can speak too highly of her. Our narrator feels suffocated, but there are many things in this story that can change that. The opening line, "Last night I dreamt I went to Mandalay," is iconic, as is the House of Mandalay itself. It was based on a real house called Menabili that the young Daphne du Maurier would trespass upon and adored. She said it was like the Sleeping Beauty of a fairy tale. But not only did this house inspire Mandalay, it actually became her real life home, her dream home, in which she lived in and wrote in often. And Mandalay is a character in its own right, really. It pulls the characters together and it witnesses all of their indiscrepancies. Daphne's writing is poetic and gothic, even as she describes the now overgrown situation of Mandalay, where she recalls being so fond, and you wonder where she is now recalling this. But it is not long before you are pulled back to the beginning of the story and to Mrs. Van Hopper and Monte Carlo. We are not meant to like the character of Mrs. Van Hopper. She is vicious and a busybody. She wants to ingratiate herself into all society and make sure that she knows everything about everyone. She finds out that Maxim is staying at the same hotel as her, and she is thrilled. He is very high profile after the death of his wife, and she makes sure that he has coffee with them. This first meeting between our narrator, Maxim, and Mrs. Van Hopper is quite humorous, as Maxim pokes fun at the old lady who remains completely oblivious. Luckily, Mrs. Van Hopper becomes ill, freeing up our narrator's days to spend as she will. And under Maxim's pursuit, even though he is quite domineering, she ends up spending her days with him, going on car rides with him, and slowly falling in love. It becomes clear at this point that our narrator spends a lot of time inside her own head. She obsesses about things which may or may not never happen, and a lot of emphasis is put on her youth and her vulnerability. Maybe something that factors in maybe becoming a victim of this whirlwind romance and accepting Maxim's proposal, even though it is put in quite a cold business deal style. So our narrator becomes Mrs. De Winter. Like Jane is Mr. Rochester, Maxim is not a nice, kind, lovely man. He is dark, brooding, quite unfeeling, actually. And I feel really sorry for the narrator when she is told she cannot have the wedding of her dreams or even a nice wedding, because it's not like it's his first. But he takes her back to Mandalay, rings on their fingers, and Mrs. De Winter is horrified, shy and embarrassed at the massive amount of attention that is being put upon her, as everyone is so curious to check out Maxim's new and second wife. She nervously meets the servants she will struggle to command. In fact, she may feel that the house belongs more to them than it does to her. And actually, a question you can ask all throughout the book is that, does Mrs. De Winter ever feel that the house is ever hers, because it is always Rebecca's? And is this why she is constantly pretending to be better than she is, even to the servants, to try and make herself look more competent? I love the first image of my favourite character, Mrs. Danvers, the maid in charge, as it quotes, "Someone advanced through the sea of faces, someone tall and gaunt, dressed in deep black, whose prominent cheekbones and great hollow eyes gave her a skull's face, parchment white, sat on a skeleton's frame." Rebecca's ghost is prevalent throughout this entire story. Mrs. De Winter has to not only do things like use her pen, her handkerchief, put flowers in her vases, be surrounded by her decor, but nobody has ever forgotten her. The servants speak about how Rebecca preferred things to be run her way, and Mrs. De Winter really doesn't believe that she is the real Mrs. De Winter, which is proved when she answers the telephone and someone asks for Mrs. De Winter, and she tells them that she's dead. Now, I'm going to get into spoilers. I'm not going to give away the ending of the book, but spoilers are coming, so this is the point where you might want to turn off. Soon, the mentally challenged character of Ben is introduced, and the mystery really begins. I'm not going to give away the ending of this book, but I would like to go into a bit about the brilliant character that is Mrs. Danvers. It is revealed that Mrs. Danvers was besotted with Rebecca since she was a young girl. She has turned mad with grief. She cannot let her go. And you can see with Mrs. Danvers' gaunt face and skeletal frame how maybe even a part of Mrs. Danvers died when Rebecca did. When Mrs. De Winter enters a room by mistake, she is shocked and upset to learn that it is Rebecca's old bedroom, perfectly preserved by Mrs. Danvers as if Rebecca is still alive. Mrs. Danvers is not well and manically gives Mrs. De Winter a tour of Rebecca's bedroom, showing her all of Rebecca's effects, her furs, her brushes, her clothes, her towels, everything. It is unsettling. And this is when you really know that there is one person that Mrs. De Winter is never going to be good enough for. Danvers' most triumphant move is persuading Mrs. De Winter to wear a specific costume for the annual fancy dress ball held at Mandalay. Mrs. De Winter makes a big deal out of posing on the top of the staircase with her big reveal of the costume, only to find Maxim disgusted, outraged and angry at her. She has no idea why, but finds out that this was the exact same costume that Rebecca dressed in the year before she died. Mrs. Danvers has tricked her yet again. Mrs. De Winter is absolutely devastated and exclaims to herself, "But Rebecca would never grow old. Rebecca would always be the same, and for her I could not fight. She was too strong for me." In a fit of insanity by both of them, Mrs. Danvers tries to get Mrs. De Winter to jump out of Rebecca's window to her death, and Mrs. De Winter seems to consider it. Then a boat crashes on the shore of Mandalay, and it absolutely changes everything. That's all I'm going to give away about this book, but I urge you to read it. It is a strong 5 out of 5 stars for me. So that's that. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give me a thumbs up down below. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe. It's a very small channel, so every subscription really does make a difference. For news on the channel, or if you just want to chat, follow me at Abby Matt Reads on Twitter. I have a Facebook page, facebook.com/Abby Matt Reads. And if you have any opinions on Rebecca, if you disagree with anything I've said, if you'd just like to open up some dialogue about it, then there's a comment section below and I will love to read anything you have to say. Thank you for watching. Bye!